absolute value. Absolute value. So if I want to say the absolute value of x, I put x in between these two vertical lines. That's how I write absolute value of x. The way you can think of it is it's defined as the distance of x from O, from 0 on a number line. So if I've got 0 on the number line and I've got 5 here, what would this distance here be? What's the distance from 0 to 5? Anyone? What's that distance from 0 to 5 on a number line? 5, good. But what's also the distance from -5 to 5 on a number line? How many jumps? It's 5. So I can say that the absolute value of 5 is 5, because absolute value is defined as the distance from your point to the origin, like to 0 on the number line. So I'm saying here that 5 is 5 units from the origin, but -5 is also 5 units from the origin. All right, so it's like it's, so that's how you can think of it as. So if I write the absolute value of 5, it's just 5. If I write the absolute value of -5, that's also 5. Okay, do you get what I'm doing? Ones if I do, I know I've got this, but just ignore this at the moment. Absolute value of 6 minus 8. We're just going to do some examples. Now, before I do absolute value, what is 6 minus 8? -2. So just by looking at what we did up there, what's the absolute value of -2? 2. So when you do the absolute value of a negative, it just becomes positive. It's asking you, how far is -2 from 0? It's 2 units from 0. Don't worry about the direction. Now, all right, so I might go absolute value of 7 times 2 minus 6. What would you get here? So you just work it out. So absolute value of 7 times 2 minus 6, what's that? 14 minus 6. Absolute value of 8 just happens to be 8. So if it's positive, great, keep it the same. If it's negative, you've got to write it as a positive number, because absolute value is defined as the distance of your number from the origin. So when I write here, I've got, what is the absolute value of -2? It's 2, because -2 is 2 units from the origin. Do we understand that? All right. So they're just some examples of how to do absolute values. They're not really tricky. Okay. Now, I've written something here. This is the definition of absolute value. Now, what this is saying, the absolute value of x is just x if x is greater than 0. So it's like here, you know how I did absolute value of 5? Well, the answer is just 5. So it's the same number if x is positive. You don't change anything, right? But look at this one. The absolute value of x is -x if x is less than 0. Let's have a look at my example. Now, I've got absolute value of x is -x if x is less than 0. That's like doing my example like before. For example, the absolute value of -5. Now, is -5 less than 0? Yes. So what do I do? See, my actual x is -5. So the absolute value of x is -x if x is less than 0. So it's negative, and then I put what x is, -5, which happens to be +5. So if you're doing the absolute value of a negative, you put another negative in front of it, negative becomes positive. Do you get it? That's the definition. So that is the definition of absolute value. So if you're doing the absolute value of a negative, you just put another negative in front of it. Negative of your negative is positive. That's how you get the positive answer. Why am I allowed to say absolute value of -5 is 5? Because I'm putting a negative in front of the -5. Do you get it? So if your number's positive, it's fine, right? So example, absolute value of x equals x. You know, this is part of the definition. If x is greater than 0, that's my rule. Sorry, that's my rule. This is my example. This is my rule. This is my example. So that's like saying the absolute value of 7, you know it's just 7. Because when the number's positive, you just keep it the same. If the number's negative, the absolute value of that negative number, you write it as your positive answer. But you can't just change it. the definition is you put a negative in front of the negative to get the positive. All right? Now, absolute value, evaluate this. Absolute value of 6 minus 10, and then take away 3. So what's that? The absolute value of, what's 6 minus 10? Negative 4, and then I've got to do minus 3, which is, what's the absolute value of negative 4? 4, and then minus 3. Are we okay with that? Which is 1. Good. All right, we're going to do some other questions in a minute. Very simple examples of solving simple absolute value equations. See, if absolute value of x is 6, what could that x be to get an answer of 6? Could an x be positive 6 or negative 6? Right? That's that simple type. Here's another one. The absolute value of 2x equals 8. What could that 2x be? Couldn't that 2x be 8, or couldn't that 2x equal negative 8? Do you get what I'm doing? So I know you're thinking x is 4. It is, but there is another answer. So if the absolute value of x of 2x is 8, that means that that whole 2x could equal 8, or that whole 2x couldn't equal negative 8. So now we just solve each of those equations. So what does x equal? 8 over 2, which is 4. What does this x equal? Negative 8 on 2, which is negative 4. I'll keep going. In absolute value equations, you've got two scenarios. What could that x minus 5 equal? No. What's inside the absolute value signs could be 2, or what's in the absolute value signs could be negative 2. That's all it is. Because the absolute value of 2 is 2, and the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. So that whole x minus 5 could be 2. Does that make sense? So now solve that, and what do you get? X is 2 plus 5, which is 7. And this one? X is negative 2, what? Plus or minus 5? Plus 5. So x is 3. Now let's check our answers if they work. What's 7 minus 5? 2. Absolute value of 2 is 2. What's 3 minus 5? Negative 2. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2. So what do I write here now? What are my two equations? That in there could be which two numbers? The x plus 2 could be 4, or the x plus 2 could be negative 4. Okay? We good now? X is 4 minus 2, which is 2. Negative 4 minus 2, which is negative what? Negative 6. Are we good? So if x was 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, absolute value of 4 is 4. And if x is negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4, absolute value of negative 4 is 4. We keep going. You want to try this one? Equations with this one. So that 2x minus 3 could equal positive 9, or that 2x minus 3 could equal negative 9. So we've got 2x is 9 plus 3, so 2x is 12. In other words, x is 6. Or we've got that 2x is negative 9 plus 3, so it's negative 6. And what's x in this case? Negative 6 divided by 2, which is good. All good? They're not hard. They're saying that the absolute value of negative x equals the absolute value of x for all x. Let's just have a look. Example. Let's say x is 7. Does the absolute value of negative 7, because I'm just saying when x is 7, absolute value of negative 7 equals absolute value of 7. Is that true? Why is it true? Because they're both equal to 7. Good. All right, next rule. Rule number 1. Number 2. The absolute value of x minus y equals the absolute value of y minus x for all x and y. Well, let's have a look. For example, if x is, I don't know, 4 and y is 7, let's try it. You want to prove it? So this first example was if x is 7. Now we've got our second rule. The absolute value of x minus y equals the absolute value of y minus x for all x and y. We're going to see if that's true, if x is 4 and y is 7. So on my left-hand side, I've got absolute value of x minus y. That's absolute value of 4 minus 7, which is absolute value of what? I'm just doing that left-hand side first. Negative 3, which is 3. Now I'm doing the absolute value of y minus x. So this is how I would do it. I would work out what the absolute value of x minus y is. Then I would work out the absolute value of y minus x. That's 7 minus 4, which is absolute value of 3, which is also 3. So I can now say absolute value of x minus y equals absolute value of y minus x. So that's the rule. It's the next two that I'm interested in more so. Absolute value of x times y inside the absolute value signs is like you're doing the absolute value of each one separately and multiplying. Example, I might do if x is 4 and maybe y is negative 3. Okay? So that would be the absolute value of x times y is the absolute value of 4 times negative 3, which is absolute value of negative 12, which is 12. And then on my right-hand side, so I'm doing one side with the 4 and the negative 3, and then I'm doing the other side of that equation with the 4 and the negative 3. So that's the absolute value of 4 times the absolute value of negative 3, which is what? What's your next step in working? 4 times 3, no, absolute value of negative 3 is 3, which is 12. So in the first one, you have to work out what 4 times negative 3 is first. Get the negative 12 and then do the absolute value. But in the second one, you're doing the absolute value of each one individually first and then multiplying afterwards. So in the first one, you multiply first because you've got to do the x times the y first and then do the absolute value at the end. In the second one, we do the absolute value of each number first and then multiply. And the last rule is the division rule, that the absolute value of x, absolute value, there's one absolute value sign, of x over y is the same as doing the absolute value of x over the absolute value of y for all x and y not equal to 0. Y can't equal 0. Example, we'll make them both negative this time. Let x be negative 8 and let y be negative 2. Doesn't matter if they're positive or negative. So I do one side first and then I do the other one. So I'm showing what I get for this side. What do I do? See, it's all under the one absolute value. So it's got to go like this, negative 8 over negative 2. Do you divide first or do you do the absolute value first with this left-hand side? You have to divide first. So you do the division, get an answer, and then do the absolute value. So what's negative 8 divided by negative 2? Positive 4. Absolute value of positive 4 is 4. Now we look at the next one, and they have to be done separately. So absolute value of negative 8 is 8. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So that works as well. Okay? And you can just box up the rule. So they were just the rules. The absolute value of x and then squaring it is the same as just x squared. Let's have a look. I know that's going to work with a positive number. Do you want to try it with a negative number? All right? For all x. So, for example, if x is negative 3. So let's do that side first. The absolute value of negative 3, So the absolute value of x squared is, so I'm doing my example, if x was negative 3, I'm working out the left-hand side first. So if x is negative 3, I get absolute value of x squared is absolute value of negative 3 and then square it. What's that? What's the absolute value of negative 3? 3 and then square it and you get 9. And now, if x is negative 3, this second one is just telling me to do negative 3 squared on the right-hand side. Do you see? It's just the number squared. What do I get? What's negative 3 squared? 9. So, that's just a rule. The absolute value of x all squared. You know, hey, when you square something, it becomes positive. All right? So, that's another rule there. And the last one is this one. The absolute value of x is the square root of x squared. So let's have a look. Let's do, I don't know, x is negative 4. Ready? So we're going to do it on the left-hand side first. Absolute value of x here would be absolute value of negative 4. What's that? So this is if x is negative 4. I get 4. And on the other side, not absolute value, the square root of x squared. That is the square root of negative 4 squared. And I know you can't square root a negative, but you're square rooting negative 4 squared. What's negative 4 squared? 16. And what's the square root of 16? Okay, so that's another rule. That the absolute value of x equals the square root of x squared.